While picking a race for a new character, people tend to look at only two things. One, do the ability scores match my class idea? And two, does the race have Darkvision? I say, enough of that bullcrap. Let's look at other cool racials you can build around. Welcome to the Attic Dungeon. My name is Sam, and whether it's building a tanky wizard or making a non-variant human, I'm here to help you with everything. So, ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to look at racial abilities. Every race has some cool stuff to work with, but often people tend to let it be overshadowed by the ability scores. The race cannot bump your primary score to 16 at level 1. Why even look at it then? Because some of the racial abilities that some races possess are well worth not having your primary score maxed out at level 1 or even not having Darkvision. Usually these racials will enhance your character in some other way. It might increase your utility in the party, your skills, or your character defenses. There are so many races in 5e right now that it really pays off to have a look at them all and see what you can do with them. I'll also talk about what the ability scores of the race are going to do for you when they are not your primary score, because often people just dismiss them right away if this is the case, and never forget that every ability score does something for you. It might not help you kill the monster any quicker, but it's still going to boost you in some way. If by now you're already convinced that what I am doing is really great, or you just want to support me in my crazy endeavors, don't hesitate to click the subscribe button, leave a like, or leave a comment. Now, let's get on with the show! Most of the time today, I'll also be focusing on a few lesser used racials. Everybody knows how awesome Halfling Luck is. Everybody knows that a variant human has a really good racial, namely any feat ever. So I'm not going to talk about those. I'm going to talk about everything else. And we'll start with one of my favorite defensive racials. It is of course going to be a dwarf racial, and more specifically the mountain dwarfs Dwarven armor training. What it does is very straightforward. It makes you proficient with light and medium armor. There you go. Now, mountain dwarfs are often picked because they are strong martial characters. I mean, they get a whooping +2 to both strength and constitution, which means that you could have 18 strength and 18 con by level 4. This is really nice as far as ability scores go. It's one of the highest you can get. All classes for whom these ability scores are relevant, this strength and this constitution, however, already gain all the armor proficiencies and already gain the weapon proficiencies you get from being a dwarf as well. So for these armor proficiencies for light and medium armor to come into play, you have to pick a class that doesn't possess them. You have to pick something that is not a fighter, barbarian, paladin, mountain dwarf. What is this world coming to? Obviously, the dwarves have a wonderful natural +2 to constitution alongside these armor proficiencies, so any squishy class is going to see their defenses improved considerably starting from level 1. So normally your wizard at level 1 would have to get by casting mage armor or having shield and absorb elements nearby when being attacked. Why not just dress him up in medium armor though? Don't care about mage armor, just make a really tanky wizard. And now for wizards, this is still quite okay. They have a very broad spell pool. They can afford to pick up the mage armor and the shield spell. But if you're a sorcerer, a bard, or a non-hexblade warlock, so to speak, having access to medium armor and thus a decent armor class without having to spend one of your very few spells known or spell slots on it can really lighten the load in general. So go for it. Create your tanky dwarf caster. The constitution is going to make sure that your concentration saves are going to be better. The armor is going to keep you alive. And you know, the strength is going to have some use at some point. It's going to give you a decent athletics. That's something rarely seen on a wizard. You're not going to have negative athletics as a sorcerer or whatever. It increases your carrying capacity as well. You can haul around more junk because you do have to carry that heavy medium armor around. So the increased strength from the mountain dwarfs kind of compensates for this in your carrying capacity. So that's actually very important in this case. Sure, you're not going to have the starting gold to buy decent medium armor at the start, but it shouldn't be too hard to find some armor to get you going on one of your first missions, or as soon as you get back into town with some nice juicy coins in hand to buy armor. All in all, I'm convinced that a mountain dwarf is a very solid choice for any squishy who wants to stop being a squishy. After all, if you're knocked out, you won't kill anything. Mind you that playing a Gitanyaki Gith also gives you medium armor and some martial weapon proficiencies, but these characters are usually lawfully evil, and not everyone can play that. It's a very hard line to balance on during a game, and a lot of DMs will simply not allow you to play an evil character in their campaigns. So go for trusty old faithful dwarves and show them what you're made of. So we talked about armor proficiencies and how they can have a nice impact on your class, and I really mean it, they're really awesome. And I wish I could say the same for the weapon proficiencies. A lot of races gain extra weapon proficiencies, but usually these will not come into play at all. Because again, if they would be relevant, your character class is usually going to give them to you or give you an equivalent. For example, if you want to play a Strain Bard Dwarf, yay, Warhammers, but Bards already get longswords, which are basically the same damage dice. And if you're going to play a Strain Bard, chances are like 99.9% that you'll be playing a Valor Bard, and thus you will gain access to all martial weapons anyway. So weapon proficiencies gained by a race are usually more for the flavor, which doesn't mean they can't be awesome. I have a friend of mine who is playing the Mountain Dwarf Wizard at the moment, and he bought himself a Warhammer because it looks badass. That's reason enough. The rule of cool is good. There is, however, one notable exception to they're only for show when it comes to racial weapon proficiencies, and that is when playing a Wood Elf Rogue. You get access to the longbow that way. Rogues, as you know, a rogue can use sneak attack with any ranged weapon, but they only get access to like the D6 ranged weapons. They get a short bow, they get a hand crossbow, but that's it. By being a wood elf, however, you get access to the longbow and thus can use one of those mighty weapons in your ranged shenanigans. The longbow proficiency might also work out for a swords bard. Correct me if I'm wrong, and please talk about it in the comments because I'm not entirely sure, but I went through the D&D Beyond version of Xanatar's Guide to Everything like 15 times for this, and that should be the most up-to-date one. Nowhere in the swords bard class features there is a mentioning of the fact that you have to use melee weapons to use the blade flourishes. So no one's stopping you from using a longbow and still using the blade flourish to do more damage, gain more armor class, move around, what have you. The thing is, you would not be using the fighting styles that the college offers though. It offers dueling and the two-weapon fighting style. Obviously your longbow would not be using these, so maybe the longbow would be a nice backup weapon, so you're not just stuck viciously mocking stuff from a distance when you're not casting big spells. Think about it, have a look at it and talk about it, please. So I said I would talk about the ability scores and what they do for you when it's not your primary score. Now dexterity, obviously for rogues, it is your primary score, so yeah, it increases your damage, blah blah blah. But also, and also for the bards, of course, for whom it's not a primary score, it increases your armor class, it increases your dexterity save, which is pretty important to avoid a lot of damagey magic effects or traps and such. So that's good. You also get an increase to wisdom as a wood elf, a nice little +1. The fact that you're already trained in perception as an elf alongside with this bonus makes it very easy for you to have a really good perception skill and not be caught pants down in the middle of an ambush. There you go, what's not to love? Wisdom also governs a few other skills as every score does, and wisdom saves are really important to avoid mind control effects. Stuff like charm person, suggestion, they all rely on your wisdom save. So a wisdom buff might help to keep your brain in your head uncontrolled by other evil beings or your fellow player who just wants you to do something and will make you do it. Otherwise, elves get a little increase in speed and they can hide really easily. You can even hide in heavy rain. Now, remember that if your DM ever puts you in a heavy rainstorm, just hide in it and watch his face like, you can do that? Yes, I can. It's going to be a lot of fun. I think it's probably one of the least used elf racials out there, but it sounds like a lot of fun, and if I would play elves, I would have probably abused it already. Even if you're not using those weapon proficiencies for some big flashy class enhancement, they might just let you complete your character fantasy, and that is also worth picking it up for. I mean, it's your game, style your character the way you want. Then let's talk Aasimar. I like Aasimar and I like their racials. They are a great race to play that light-driven Justicard type of character, and apart from the fact that they possess some natural healing abilities and bring resistances to 2 types of damage to the table, Radiant and Necrotic, pretty good depending on your campaign actually. Each of the sub-races has their own little special forms, sometimes with wings even. They can pop for some AoE damage, some single target damage, or a nice frightening effect. Well, these are no game-breaking racials. I absolutely love the flavor of these things. And they add a nice little power bonus that can tilt the battle in your favor. They strongly remind me of the World of Warcraft Paladins Avenging Wrath ability, sprouting some wings and bringing the will of the light to whatever poor bugger you're punching at that moment. While they all do a terrific job, these racials, it is the Scourge Aasimar's Radiant Consumption that is of interest to us today. This form makes the Aasimar burn so hard that each creature in a 10 feet radius, including the hero itself, takes damage equal to half your level rounded up each turn. It's a great way to get some AoE damage out of a character that doesn't have any, or to enhance any existing AoE damage. What this extra tick of damage also does is force enemy spellcasters to make concentration checks when that is relevant. As you know, any separate tick of damage triggers a concentration save, so this is an extra chance for them to fail concentrating on a spell whilst slowly burning every enemy around you to a crisp. What's not to like? So, since Aasimar gain Charisma as their main racial, let's talk about what Charisma does for you when it's not your primary stat. There are some obvious things. Charisma makes your character better at social interactions. Persuasion skill, deception skill, intimidation, they're all related to charisma. Does this mean your character cannot hold a conversation without having 14 charisma? Of course not. You can participate in any social encounter ever. But it might be wiser to let the smooth talking bard open up the conversation if it's important. And of course, if they're asking you to make a persuasion roll, it helps to have that little nice bonus. When it comes to charisma saves, they're a bit all over the place. Quite a few of them have to do with binding spells. The banishment spell, planar binding, they all use charisma saves. Something like Zone of Truth, which is like a lie detector, needs a charisma save. If you do the save, if you make the save rather, and you actually pass the save, you can lie in the Zone of Truth, but the caster knows that you passed the check though. They don't know if you're lying or not, but they know that you've passed the check. So it's a bit of an all-around save, and I think it comes into play more often at higher levels rather than at lower levels. So there you go, charisma as a secondary ability. Now let's do something weird and talk about ability scores only for this specific race. But Sam, you were going to talk about their racials. Ability scores are their racials. We're talking about the normal human. Yes, and not the variant human. I know the variant human is amazing. Super customizable, can fill any role ever. But have you considered that with getting +1 to each ability score, the normal human actually has the biggest ability score increase in the entire book with +6? Some of these might not come into play all the time, of course, but since I've been discussing all of the ability scores when they're not your primary score, you should start to see that each ability score is going to contribute something. And with the normal human, not having any negative ability score modifiers is super easy. Let's go for a giant skill monkey build here and make a non-variant human bard. We're going to assume that we raise our charisma, dex and constitution to decent levels already. And then for the simple price of 3 points in point buy, you can remove the remaining strength, wisdom and intelligence negative penalties and still have points left possibly to raise one of those even further. This means you're not going to have any negative modifiers ever when you have to roll for something. How amazing is that? It makes the bard's jack of all trades ability even better because you don't have to use your proficiency modifier to get out of the negative first. No, you start at 0 and you're straight into the positive with all of your abilities. It really is good and undervalued, but it makes sense because of what the variant human offers most people. But still, don't discard the normal human immediately. Have a look at him and try to do something fun with it. Fighters, for example, who gain this crazy amount of ability score increases can do a lot with these bonuses. They usually only need 2 ability scores to begin with. Strength, constitution, dex, constitution, and you can use all the other points plus those bonuses to make this wonderfully flavored, well-rounded character without any downsides actually, which is crazy. I mean, almost every character that I've seen at a table has a downside, has an 8 in intelligence, an 8 in dexterity, what have you. These don't, just remove all of them. Of course, specializing in stuff has benefits, but if you like playing a good all-around character who has no flaws, and you want to go for that complete jack-of-all-trades type of character, normal human is and will always be the way to go. Next up, we make a quick stop at the Firbolg race. They have some pretty fun racials, smaller impact racials maybe, but they allow for great RP and one of them has great value during combat as well. Of course, they have their nature aspect, that's part of who they are. And they can communicate with plants and beasts in a very limited way without spending spell slots or anything in the like. If you're looking to take your nature-loving roleplay to the next level, this is the race you want to play. I've seen some of my players use spells like Speak to Animals and Beast Bond to great effect, so having a light version of these spells built into a character that might not have access to those options otherwise seems like a lot of fun. But also, they have invisibility on demand. Once per short rest or long rest, obviously, as a bonus action, they can turn invisible for a full round. That is pretty amazing. It allows you to set up some really strong stuff for your next turn. So, yay for Firbolgs. And next up, we have a special one. And I'm guessing the reason that this sees little play is because the race tends to be chaotic evil. But hey, every race can have exceptions, as you know. As long as you find a decent RP reason for it, your character can be a normal hero. Otherwise, we would not have so many drow players at the table, because drows tend to be evil as well. So why not play a bugbear? Bugbears have a wonderful ability called Long-Limbed. It means that on your turn, all of your melee attacks gain an additional 5 feet of range. You might know the Sentinel Polearm Master build. It's a build that focuses on being able to attack any enemy that comes within 10 feet range of you because you have a spear, and you can knock them flat on their bum. That's the idea. They cannot move. Boo-boo. Imagine that on your turn you have an additional 5 feet of range to attack. Now you have a polearm fighter with 15 feet of melee range attack on his turn. If you're a fighter and you have like 5 attacks, or what's it, 4 that they get in the end, I mean, 15 feet is decent, you know. You can just stand in the middle and poke everyone to death. This is ludicrous, I say. The fact that bugbears also have stealth proficiency and gain a nice 2d6 extra damage if you can surprise a creature allows for a semi-long ranged melee explosive opening kind of thing. I'm sure that if you spend your effort on creating a decent backstory, your DM would allow you to play a bugbear. Go for it. Why aren't you playing one already? Enjoy poking people 15 feet away from you with a giant spear stick. Come on. I suppose that at this point, we should also have a look at the Kenku. Possibly, the Kenku are the hardest race to roleplay out there. Why? They can't really speak. They can make noise, they can talk, sure, but all the sentences or the words that they say are mimicked from hearing them before. So if a Kenku says hello to you, it's not going to be his own voice. You're going to hear hello from maybe your own voice. You go to the Kenku and say, oh, hello, how are you doing? And the Kenku will answer in exactly the same voice to you. Hello, how are you doing? That is their only way of talking, is repeating what they've heard at some point before and repeating it in the same voice. They're also absolute experts at forging fake documents. Shit, these guys are walking copying machines and can be a huge asset to any party that doesn't mind to fake it till you make it. Imagine being able to copy any sentence in any voice you've heard, though. Luring out people has never been so easy. Now, of course, they can discover it's a fake with an insight check versus your deception check, but Kenkus can get proficiency in deception as a racial as well, so that already helps a lot. Invest a bit in your charisma to make yourself a super good fake voice actor. You want a real challenge? Play a Kenku Bard. Your deception will be off the rockers, but smooth talking with pre-heard sentences is going to be hard. So you're going to have to kind of have a list of sentences that your Kenku, or sounds maybe even, that your Kenku knows and can generate. It's a real challenge, but they're really strong racials actually for social interaction. Before we head into our last race for today, I'll make a quick stop at intelligence, because none of the races that I picked for today had intelligence as their primary stat, but I want to talk about it anyway. And I'm going to do a quick side trip on Constitution again as well. First off, intelligence as a stat obviously governs all the skills that require knowledge about something. How much do you know about the world? That is governed by your intelligence skills. So most of the skills that require you to remember knowledge are going to be intelligence based. When it comes to intelligence saves, these are again a bit like wisdom, mainly for protecting your brain, albeit from different types of attacks. Intelligence checks are used to identify illusions from the real thing. They're also used when somebody's attacking you with psychic damage, not always, but some of the time. But mainly it's to recognize illusions, and if you would encounter a mind flayer, you know, those tentacly mind sucker things, intelligence saves are going to be your best friend. That's how you prevent them from sucking your brain out of your skull, to be honest. So intelligence, not a bad thing to have. Then Constitution. I already mentioned Constitution obviously for concentration saves, but I also want to quickly side note that Constitution obviously governs your hit points, so it's always important. And Constitution saves are mainly against poison and disease, and they are pretty common, so they are relatively important. Having a good Constitution score is important for every character, I would say. So that's that on those ability scores. Now let's cruise on to our last racial for today. And while I was doing research for this episode, I discovered this one, and I love it so much that my next video is going to be partially all about it. It is the Loxodon race. Loxodons came from the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica. They're an elephant-like race. They gain +2 con, +1 wisdom. And of course, since they're elephants, they have trunks. Now you cannot use the trunk to hold a weapon. You cannot use the trunk to perform the somatic component of your spells. You can use it as a snorkel. You can use it as an unarmed attack. And you can use it to grapple someone. That makes the Loxodon the only race that I know of in D&D that can grapple 3 people at the same time. In case that you don't know how grappling works, I'll give a very brief explanation, and if it piques your interest, be sure to stay tuned for my next video in 2 weeks. It's going to be all about grappling. The idea is that with grappling, instead of attacking, you try to grab someone and you use your strength to pin them down. Once you've grabbed them, you can work them down to the floor, which means everybody gets advantage, but they can't move. That's the starting idea. And since you have 2 hands, if you want to, if you're all right with not attacking, you can try to grapple 2 people. If you have the extra attack feature, you can even do that in 1 turn. You can replace each attack with a grapple. If you take the right feeds, grapple becomes a bonus action, blah, blah, blah. A lot of info about grapple. That's for in 2 weeks. But the Loxodon can grapple 3 people. 1, 2, and 1 with the trunk. I think it's an amazing wrestling type of race, to be honest, and I'm looking forward to presenting the builds that I have in mind for this ultimate type of AoE grapply character. Because you can grapple someone with your trunk, you have a few options. First, you can just grapple 3 people, which sounds amazing, to be honest. Or you can just grapple 1 with the trunk and punch the living bejeebus out of him with your weapons. You can grapple 2 guys and still have a weapon. As I said, a lot of options. Sounds like a really amazing racial to play around with. On a complete side note, they also have the option of taking an alternative armor class calculation. They can take armor class of 12 plus your constitution modifier, and since they're a constitution race, that's also a nice jump in the right direction. And this might be fun for spellcasters who are sick of focusing on dexterity to stay alive. Maybe your wizard actually would love to have some charisma as well and wants to drop the dexterity or whatever. Take a Loxodon, take a very tanky, beefy elephant. You don't need dexterity for your armor class, just make sure you counterspell the fireballs. And you'll have a decent armor class. Again, you don't have to invest in the shield spell, the mage armor spell whatsoever, and you will have a very tanky wizard with a lot of hit points. So if you want to play a squishy, but you're sick of focusing on dexterity every time, which honestly I understand, take a Loxodon. Just whack people around with your trunk and be very, very, very beefy. Right, that is enough crazy stuff for today. Hopefully I've made you aware that there are plenty of other things to consider outside of ability scores and Darkvision when it comes to picking the right race for your character build. If you know of any other little used racial ability that's really cool, be sure to leave a comment down below where we can discuss it. If you like what I'm doing, click the subscribe button. If you really like what I'm doing, click the little bell next to it, and then you won't miss a single episode ever again. And hopefully we'll see each other again next time in the Attic Dungeon.